Maloile day, talofa, everyone. I hope you all are having a great day or most likely evening from wherever you're viewing this broadcast. Speaking from Aotearoa, New Zealand. It's good to be back here. I was kind of away for a little while, just overseas, visiting with some family. And yeah, we're very excited for this live digital cover session on the Polynesian Eyes podcast for everyone that's available to join us. And yeah, Dua, how's everything going on your neck of the woods? And any interesting updates lately?
No, this is officially our first live digital Kava session from the entertainment capital of the world, Las Vegas. I am a lone ranger in our new headquarters here in Las Vegas. Obviously, the family is still in San Antonio in South Central Texas, but I'm doing this long, you know, commute from San Antonio to Las Vegas for work. I usually come in on a Sunday, go back on a Wednesday. I've been doing that for 2 months now. And I'm just excited to go back this last time this coming Wednesday, pack everything up in San Antonio, and head to Las Vegas. So excited to get our first live digital Kava session from Las Vegas launched, Mr.
Nice.
Aotearoa.
Nice, Dua, and it's good to get back to a normal routine since you've been doing the whole traveling back and forth for 2 months, huh? Um, nice. All right, Dor, what do you have for us? What you thinking? Shall we discuss tonight on the digital live Kava session?
Yeah, so we are well overdue on a handful of our episodes, right? As all of our
Yep.
viewers know, we have our live digital Kava sessions where we come online. Sometimes we answer questions from the audience. Sometimes we go through a series. One of those series is William Mariner,
Mm.
some content made by our good friend Kava University, Lolo
Oh wow. Yep.
Tuyaki, and we're about 3 months behind on doing an update there. So that's really what we're going to kind of focus on the show today. But I thought, Mussy, just kind of some conversations about kind of the progress we've done on the program, just as a part of the intro for our
Mm.
show before we get into the main meat of it is um, really the tremendous activity we've seen on YouTube, right?
Yeah.
Typically it's been TikTok where we see a tremendous amount of activity, but kind of from your perspective, what have you seen from YouTube that's kind of picked up, or what are your thoughts on why there's a switch in the interactions?
I think there's a lot more engagement with our content that people are sharing on social media, and then people from social media are tuning in and watching our full broadcast on YouTube. And I feel like there's just a tremendous traffic that's coming on YouTube, and I think it's the word is just spreading about some of our content, and not only that, but the our loyal followers are sharing the digital live cover session of the Polynesianized podcast. So I think that's what's contributing and the biggest factor to it for the a switch from social media into YouTube, that we're getting a lot of traffic coming in on YouTube. But that's kind of what my thoughts there, Dua.
Yeah, 100%. And it really is something that's really interesting that we kind of mentioned on some of our discussions offline, Masi, is some of the unique topics that we can, with relatively high certainty, say ideas and influences from the Polynesianized perspective is making it throughout social media. Like you're saying, a lot of our viewers are sharing the content online. We appreciate it with all
Mm-hmm.
that support. But even other content online is sharing ideas like the Toka Tufa that we know is a very unique concept that
Yes.
is spreading. Even AI is picking it up because that one
Yes.
podcast that we were listening to on the live digital Kava session, it shared certain concepts that we know originate from the Polynesian eyes. So that's kind of
Yeah,
cool. Kind of seeing this, these ideas going out, and making sure, we know not everyone's going to agree with us. We know that we're not always 100% accurate, or our ideas are the only ideas that matter. But what we want to do is make sure that everyone knows there's more than one side of the story.
correct. And just to add on to that, to like what you said, right? The biggest, like the last program you did, and I did follow it, the Tokatufa. That concept of idea has only been created or researched from the Vitafale that we've kind of used. And look, AI is going through all the networks and the internet, and has able to retrieve that information and share it on that AI podcast that you shared in your last program. And not only that, with the like you said, with our ideas and stuff, we're sharing it to. It's part of the throwing the idea there in the soup, and if people still wanna use that ingredient in the soup, that's where it is compared to other ideas, and that's kind of where we think we see our niche in this whole discovering and rediscovering of the Polynesian origin and history.
Yes. Another interesting thing, just before we get into the meat of the show, we'd like to thank our cousin Elon Musk.
Oh
Another
yeah.
first, Mr. Aotearoa, is this is the first time the show is running through Starlink,
Oh
because I'm moving into from San Antonio to Las Vegas. I bought Starlink because I
eh,
knew I wasn't going to have internet connectivity right off the bat at the house here in Las Vegas. So right now, another first for the show I forgot to mention is we are broadcasting around the world through Starlink. So all the satellites in the
oh
sky, out there. So I thought that's a cool little trivia right there.
yeah, yeah.
Um, Polynesian Princess
Hey,
Malo Malo,
wel-
welcome,
welcome,
Polly
Polynesian Prince.
Prince.
That is
So
pretty cool,
with
Tua,
Yeah,
with
it's a first. We'll
Starlink.
we'll take it. Yes. All right. With that being said, we are doing our our makeshift here with where we are located online. So we're gonna have to do some juggling here. I only have one screen rather than our multiple screens set up. So I'll be jumping back and forth here. Let me do this. I'm just gonna move it so the last two items are right next to each other. It'll help me swing back and forth. So let's jump in. You ready, Masi? Anything else before we jump into the content here from Kava University?
Nope, let's roll. Let's roll. I'm good from my side.
Let's do it.
After all that, all the carnage, everything we described, more of the personality of Ulukalala, Mariner, how many palangis there were, the muskets that were there, the cannons that were there, and they've won that battle, right? Then they go back to Pangaimotu. Pangaimotu is that place that's he measured about 3/4 to a mile away north of Tonga, uh, separated by a narrow reef. So I don't know if you can walk there or not, but they go to Pangaimotu. They sit down to eat. Some of them ate in Nukalofa. They ate yams, plantains, and Marin, I don't know why he worded it that way, but he said that there were roasted bodies there. So it doesn't say that they ate it, any of them, but it does say that there were burning bodies. So they might have piled the bodies up and burned them, or there were,
Hmm.
for some reason or another, there were bodies that were burning there after. But anyways, they were eating in Nukalofa. They get to Pangaimotu and they start eating, and at the admonition of the priest told them, you know what, it'd be pleasing to the gods if you guys went and rebuilt Nukalofa. You guys beat them, you guys conquered them. Now it's time for you guys to go back and build them. That's what the priest was telling Finau. So Finau sends a bunch of Tongans a bunch of the warriors to places in Tonga, or a place in Tonga that wasn't inhabited, to get bamboo so they can go back to Nukalofa and rebuild it. The night before, the chiefs in Pangaimotu told the guys in Pangaimotu to prepare pigs, yams, ripe bananas, and so forth, because the warriors are going to come eat. But at the same time, they're going to have the ceremony with the priest. So they take all this food and they take it to the priest. Now, all the matapures and the akis, they all dressed in the mats that we see typically during funeral time, they wrap themselves with big mats and they take it to the priest and go eat with them. So they go to the priest, and the priest is sitting in a hut type big house with posts. It's open, so the warriors and the matapuras and the ikis go and sit where the priest is sitting inside the house or this big hut, and then they come and make a semicircle. So it sounds like he's describing what we would do at a hala when we take stuff to for a funeral to a family, because the priest is sitting there inside of the hut, and then they come and they sit, and there's a guy sitting, will sit facing them. So there's a big space between the priest and the first guy that's sitting there in front of the kumete, or in front of the big bowl that they're using to paru kava in. And then the kava was chewed. It was chewed by the attendants. It was chewed by the people sitting behind this guy. They chew it and they pass it forward, and then they put it inside of the bowl that they're using to kava, and that guy starts following kava. And then the matapura and ikis, the ones that were dressed in mats, they come and sit around. So they're making a semicircle. It says they make an eclipse with space between the priest and them. And the kava guy sits right in the middle, the palu guy, and he starts following the kava. And everybody just sits. And he said that the priests or the matapuras and ikis just start sitting indiscriminately behind them, just wherever, because they thought it was pleasing. That type of modesty or that type of modest demeanor is pleasing to the gods, for them to just sit among the people, the matapuras and ikis, indiscriminately. Because you have the priest there, and there should be nobody else that's perhaps elevated above them, so they just sit among them, and it's just a guy following the kava. They feel like that type.
Let me pause it there. Any thoughts?
Nothing in particular. Do I'm just thinking of the when he said there's Pangaimotu chiefs. Were they, to my understanding, were there chiefs that lived in Pangaimotu that time? I just thought it was almost kind of vacant kind of island kind of thing. But I find it interesting that there were
Mm.
chiefs that actually lived in Pangaimotu, giving instructions to Ulukalala and his guys there regarding where they rest and stuff. But I just thought it was always a vacant. I just find it interesting that we're actually chief and some people living in Pangaimotu making life there. That's just me. That's what I was just kind of thinking in my head. I don't know if you have any details on that.
It, not necessarily. I think he was saying the priests, like priests,
Oh,
were on Pangaimotu, and I'm sure there were some people living there because, like you said, it's not like an island that's known for lots of people living on it. It's tiny.
mm,
Um, a couple things stand out to me as we're listening to it was, if I remember correctly, Ulukalala, after he defeats the fort in Nukalofa and he goes and he sees the carnage, he's kind of bothered by it,
mm,
right? Like
mm,
he's it almost seems like the fact that he was so destructive, he didn't like that, right? Because he ends up kind of saying it's almost like we get the feeling like, yes, I want to win, but if this is the destruction that it takes to win, he's like,
mm.
is it worth it? Is winning worth the destruction that this is causing? And he seems uneasy. And I find it interesting that when they go to Pangaimotu here, what do the priests say? It's pleasing to the gods that you go and you fix the fort,
Rebuild. Mm,
rebuild, right? So I find that kind of interesting because typically when you think of savage behavior, that's not something you're concerned with, right? It's like we win at all costs, we won. You know what I mean? Like the battle itself was worth the victory. But
mm,
obviously there seems to be a higher principle that is operating. And remember, William Mariner is only describing what he sees happen. And that's one of the, it's awesome to have William Mariner's perspective, but you can tell he's an outsider because he's just describing what's happening, but he can't give a lot of insight as to what's driving that type of behavior, right? And
mm.
that type of thinking. Why was Ulukalala so disturbed or uneasy when he saw the destruction? Why is it that the quote unquote gods would 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 want you to go and repair um, the conquered fort or city. I think there's some interesting questions that come up to me um, as we listen to that. But obviously, William Mariner, not knowing the religion, the culture, and the history. Any thoughts on that, Mussy? Because I think I have one more thing to bring up to see your thoughts on. But any thoughts
Yeah.
on that?
No, no, good point, too. Because by now when he's recording his experience and his his record of what he witnessed in Tonga, he understands the language, right? So he understands, but it
Hmm.
is interesting that it's just like same any other Tongan from Tonga. You understand the language, but if you don't really have the in-depth knowledge of cultural nuances and maybe the old way of how they do things, it can still be a little difficult to explain, even though you have the same language. You know what I mean, Dua?
Yes, yes.
Um, and that's the reason why not every Tongan from Tonga can do a proper Kava ceremony that's kind of been done. Usually, if you want to do like those Kava ceremonies for like weddings or for um, certain events and stuff, there's only like a few people that you probably have to go in contact to try to see if they're willing to assist you to do some cultural things. It's the same thing when you usually go and give a nice proper hala to a certain family. You usually want to pick out particularly a woman that understands how to present certain things, but not even though we all know the language, but the protocols or maybe the knowledge of doing certain things not everyone has, and that's what we're seeing with Mariner just trying his best with, even though he understands the language and what's going on, but not really understanding the intrinsic uh,
Mm.
cultural practice that's going on, especially with that kava that they're doing with everyone sitting there and the with the priests and the chiefs and stuff. But that's all. That's what I'm just kind of thinking out loud, Dua.
So your comments brings up an interesting question to me, Masi, and what are your thoughts on this? It sounds like understanding the language is not necessarily the most important thing, right?
Mm.
I mean, it's helpful, it's
Yes.
useful, but understanding the language itself, um, maybe, I guess the question is this: can you
Mm.
learn the culture and the principles behind the culture if you don't know the language, right? Because this is an important question. My wife has always been on my case. I didn't necessarily teach my kids to speak Tongan,
Mm.
right? And a lot of it is maybe just being lazy. I don't know. It's just something that it would it be nice to have? Yes, right? Do I
Mm.
sometimes regret it? But in my mind, now that we're having this conversation, we have William Mariner. He knows the language, but we can clearly see that just knowing the language is insufficient,
Mm.
right? And everyone seems to be, and I'm just asking the question. I don't know the answer. We're just, enjoying the digital kava here and having conversation. Everyone seems to be putting a heavy emphasis. If you don't know the language, then you're not really Tongan or Samoan or Fijian. Um, but this,
Mm.
listening to
That
this,
is,
is that
yeah.
is that really the critical piece?
Ooh. Well,
We
that's see.
right?
Yeah. Well, no, you're just making me create another question to your perspective. Which one is more important? Somebody who speaks the language or somebody that has the blood of the certain heritage? Like talk. That's the thing, right?
Yeah,
To me, I would always go the what's more important is the blood and heritage because to me anyone anyone can learn the language and can use that to manipulate, but you can't manipulate what runs through your blood,
that's what makes this question. That's why this question is
right?
coming up, right? Because
Mm,
so many of our Polynesian generation, I hear it all the time, and I'm not saying the language is not important, right? Like
yeah,
obviously
yeah,
it's important. Even
yes,
who
Yes.
didn't necessarily take full advantage to teach my kids the language, I sometimes like, man, maybe I should have done a little bit more. And I probably should have. But the question comes down to like what you're saying. What's more important? Knowing how to speak Tongan, but you don't have the heritage or the the understanding of what family being important, right? Not understanding respect, not understanding
Mm,
sacrifice, and 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 trying your best to maintain family relationships as much as possible. To me, kind of like tattoos and stuff. Tattoos
mm,
and stuff are great, but that's not the core of our culture. That's
mm,
not what makes us Tongan or Polynesian or Fijian or whatever. As much as the language is important, I still don't feel that that's what is at the core either.
mm,
I think, like you're saying, the 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 inheritance of the genes is a that's hugely impactful, and I'll explain. And this has been my logic behind it.
okay.
It is scientifically proven that your choices and your decisions changes your DNA. They've scientifically proven this. If for let's just use the example of alcoholism, drug
Drugs.
use.
Mm,
They've already shown that once one generation does that, the probability of the next 3 to 4 generations following in those footsteps are extremely high
mm,
because it's like it changes your genetic makeup, right? Like I read this book, Outliers, by Malcolm Gladwell, and they did a study. And this is an interesting study. This just goes to show how your behavior, and it has nothing to do with language, how you behave and the choices you make changes the nature of your genetic makeup. It's almost like it records it in your blood and in your DNA. And then there's a tendency of the generations after to just follow the same genetic signal. And here's the example, Masi. They were doing studies, and so they got these people to come to, I think, Stanford to go do studies. To go, they thought the study was on the answers they were going to answer on a piece of paper.
mm,
What they didn't know is the answers on the piece of paper didn't matter. The study was set up on how they behave on their way to the study,
mm,
right? And what they did was they made the hallway to go to where they were going to take the paper test. I think it was unusually tight space. It was only like 6 feet wide or 5 feet wide, the hallway. And what they did was they had the person coming in to take the test, and they had it was a bunch of males. What they did was,
mm,
as they're going in to take the test, there is another person who is speaking very rudely to a woman who is administering the quote unquote study, right? And then what they did was the person would go in, take the test, and then as they're walking out down this hallway that's very narrow, they had the person who was acting very rudely walking in the opposite direction.
mm,
And what they did is they measured what was the distance before they decided to give space to each other, right? And they measured it. And this is the interesting thing, Masi. They could locate what type of terrain and what type of people you came from with about 80 to 90% accuracy by determine how close you came before you turned.
mm,
Does that make sense?
mm,
So the people, this is how it worked out. If your ancestors, and they could track it up to 9 generations before you, if your ancestors within 9 generations lived on the highlands in Scotland or somewhere in Ireland on the hills where land was scarce and it was very territorial, and your ancestors had to fight because losing territory meant you're probably going to die because you
Losing
didn't have the
resources.
territory.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes. If you came in within 6 feet before you turned to make space,
Mm.
90% accuracy, your ancestors within 9 generations. And it didn't matter how rich you were, it
Wow.
didn't matter your education, it didn't matter where in the US you grew up. The fact that within 9 generations your ancestors lived in those areas made you much more willing to engage physically, because that's what the distance means, right?
Mm.
If your generations grew up in flat land where it was farming all the time, you didn't have to fight for resources all the time, 10 feet away you would already give space. You're less likely to engage physically.
Mm.
That's why I think, coming back to your comment, to take this long comment, Masi, is that's how important the genetics that you inherit are so important, because it, believe it or not, it will determine how you behave or what your preference is on how you behave. This is why it's so important that each individual be very careful with the decisions you make, because not only are you going to push back on any good progress that your ancestors have made, but you could also be giving bad habits to the ancestors that come after you. But I don't know. That's kind of my thoughts there. Before you answer, Masi, let's just go on a couple comments. Non-speed
Noski.
says, Maloka Kama,
Hello.
welcome to the live
Welcome.
digital Kama session. Javier Fuapao says, Malo, it's been a while since I've been on here. Thanks for keeping up the good work. Malo
Hello,
Javier.
Javier.
And then last one, Roniwa, welcome. Malo.
Welcome. Welcome, Rodney. No,
What are you?
just to
So
just
yeah,
to
any
yeah.
thoughts?
Then that's, I mean, in a perfect world, you want both, right? Your heritage
Yeah,
and the language. In the perfect world, you want both and you try your best.
the
But
ideal.
the ideal, that's what you want, because there's a lot of unique uh attributes that come from that. But if you told me to pick only one, what to keep, either, or what's more important, that's the better question. What's more important, you knowing your the blood that runs through you from your heritage, or learning the language? It's definitely, you, the blood that runs through you, because like you said, the genetics and what you teach your let's just say your prosperity to follow. To me, that's going to be more important than the language, if you told me to pick. Because to me, there's people who are like non-Tongans or non-Polynesians that's mastered the language. Does it that to me, that's just a form of communication. That's just a form of communication of what they're thinking in their head, and maybe they've learned certain cultural things, and that's what makes them, be part and understand our uniqueness of Tongan culture. But what really makes you Tongan, and there's a sense of, and this is the thing, the word, the obligation or your fatongia to your family, is
Mhm.
it's a blood thing. It's a blood thing. You can have somebody master the language and here and there, but if they don't feel obligated to do anything, they ain't gonna do it. Who are they obligated to? They're not tied to a clan or to a certain part of a family. If let's just say they're they can they can have a discretion. It's almost like they have a free pass. They can choose it to do it, or not. Most families, like you said, to like somebody who's been serving and been doing like their fatonia for many generations, it's gonna be innate in your own genetic makeup to do that, because it's in your blood. So that's what I'm just trying to say, and
Mhm.
that's interesting that we had this conversation, because I was just thinking, if you had to pick one, what's more important is to really know your heritage and your bloodline, in a sense. Then and maybe forego the language. You had to just pick one. It's more knowing your heritage in
Yeah,
that sense than the language. So that's just me right there, Dua.
no, 100%. And I think this is important. We've mentioned it multiple times, but for those who criticize Tonga for quote unquote folding to Christianity, blah blah blah. You guys didn't fight. This is what we're talking about: prioritizing what's important and making sure that the most fundamental thing survives. Because and Maui Tekelangi mentioned this, especially using the metaphor um, of the kava plant,
Mm,
right? The
mm,
kava plant, when a storm comes and it breaks all the branches of the kava tree, apparently the solution to it is to go and trim everything off of the kava plant almost down to the root. And if you don't do that, the rot from the branches, the broken branches, and if you leave it, the rot will go down into the root and potentially kill the kava
mm,
plant itself, right? And this is what we're talking about here: language, tattooing, right? All these things, like some of the ancient religion, if you want to call it, like the
mm,
ancient practices, whatever you want to say, all these little branches.
mm,
If you don't understand what the root and what's most important, you will make the mistake of, oh, we're going to over invest in the language, we're going to over invest in tattoos, we're going to over invest in this and that, because you don't understand what's the most critical piece. What is at the center? What is at the root of the culture and the people? Um, and I think that's a very important thing to keep in mind. This is what the Tu'itonga and thousands of years of trying to preserve the root, right? Because that's in order to maintain a civilization, that's what you're doing. You're
yeah.
always, yes, the branches are going to grow, but the moment everything will collapse. And that's one of the things from my mind, as we're having this conversation about William Mariner's perspective and why he can't give us more details. We're grateful for what he did, but we're just trying to analyze what's important and how it matters to us as Polynesians in the modern world, where that's a real situation that the average Polynesian overseas is dealing with. Well, I guess I'm not a. I even seen it at some podcasts, right? Well, you're not. You're a plastic Polynesian because you don't speak the language, because you don't get your tattoos, because you aren't doing this, and that. Well, is really that's what determines whether you're a real Polynesian? Is the language? Is the
Mm,
tattoo? No,
mm,
I think there's more stuff in there, and
mm.
I think that's important to have a conversation on that and to really distinguish what matters most in the culture.
Yep. Nope. Agree.
And when it boils down, what matters most is family.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
really what it boils down to.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, let's come back to Lolo.
Type of characteristic is pleasing to the gods, for them to all be the same, all on the same level, just everybody just sitting there, right, facing the priest. So when everything's prepared and ready, now the priest is sitting there with his hands clasped and is momentarily silent, sitting there. So just like a hala at a funeral, he's looking down, he's motionless, and then food is shared out, kava is being prepared, they start drinking, mixing, and then the matapules start acknowledging, or they begin to consult with the priest. Everybody's sitting. And usually the matapule or whoever is speaking will speak and they acknowledge, and sometimes the priest would answer, but for the most part, he's sitting there listening, just like at a hala, just like at a putu. He's sitting there listening. Kava's passed out, they're all drinking, and even the priest himself drinks kava as well. So this is the description of what happens when the priest starts speaking after the Matapulas and Eki starts speaking. The priest starts speaking, and he says that he starts in a lower tone, and he gradually moves to a regular or a little higher pitched tone in his voice, and he speaks in the first person of God as if he is God. He shows no emotion, and sometimes he'll speak intensified and tremble often when he gets intense. Sometimes he'll cry, and sometimes he'll get choked up, and then eventually the entire emotion subsides. And then after he does his whole presentation, and after he's done, then he eats. And Murder said that he eats a lot. I don't know because if he's a big dude, but he thinks that because of the emotion and intensities and power that is in him makes him hungry enough to eat as much as two or three men would eat. Now that's what Mariner sees,
Mm.
but I think perhaps he probably didn't eat the day before, knowing that they were going to come, the warriors were going to come up, were going to show up, and then he probably thought he'd eat with them. That's probably why he ate so much. There is a club, a war club, sitting next to him for this purpose. He picks up the war club and he looks at it attentively, and he holds it and he turns it over and he looks at it and he's saying things, but Mary said, and then he looks up and he looks right and he looks left, and he didn't know exactly what part of the culture this was or what this was, but this is just what he described the priest doing. And then he looks right and does this a few times. And he looks up, looks left, and he strikes the ground with it, or he hits the post of the house with it hard. Said he hits it with considerable force. And I imagine it's the type of emotion you have, when you dance and you haka and, during the show. And I've seen it a few times where people through the heat of the moment will pick something up and break it, right? That's how they show that's how they show their emotion. As far as I've seen guys at a college luau um, do this almost every year. That's in Snow College. And there'd be a plant, right? There'd be dancing and stuff, and then there'd be a plant somewhere on stage, and they would go over there and pick up that plant and smash the pot that the plant is in, and get dirt and everything everywhere. And for us, we understand, yeah, fine, like that type of emotion. I imagine that's what the priest was doing when he was doing that,
Oh, yeah.
to show you how intensely convicted you are in what you are doing or saying, or in the entire uh, mental, cultural feel of what just happened, because they just got back from war. After all this, then the priest himself, because he spoke from God's perspective, he gets up from where he's sitting, and then he goes and he sits somewhere in behind everybody else. Now the place that they're facing is vacant.
You can sell this.
Mm. Any thoughts on that, Masi, while we
No, just it's just a reconfirmation, Dua, of why our ancestors were able to easily you know, were easily to were able to change to the new religion, convert to the new religion easily. Look at the old practice with how influenced the priest, the taula, with the chiefs, with the people. It's the same thing with the current Christianity of the Faifekau, working along with the whole Akis and with the Kakai, or you can say Tua, with everybody else. It's the same kind of thing, and this is what a lot of people don't understand, and they think that Tonga was it's a form of colonization with Christianity coming in, and people were easily adapting Christianity. It's like, dude, if you take the same thing with this Daula, how 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 intimate his involvement with the people and the Matapure Ho'ekis with every aspect of the life. This is just after a war, and look, the Taula is
Mhm.
still part of the 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 event with the people. So it's the same thing with Christianity. What do you see? You won't go to a a gathering or a katuanga at any event. Most Polynesian event, I'll say this, particularly with the Tongan and Samoan communities, any big event, you won't see any event without a big one, especially a national or a village, without a faifekau or a taula there being present. So it just shows you how literally step by step it's really close to the Lotumui and the Lotumua, old religion and the new religion till now. Very little differences, but the big parts are kind of the same, and that's why it was an easy conversion for many of our people. That's what I was thinking in my mind when he's describing with the priest doing the kava, and he's doing with his whole kind of ceremony with the club and kind of thing. It's just it's the same kind of thing. What the impact I'm trying to say and involvement of Fife cows in today's Polynesian events. But that's what I'm thinking, Tua.
Yeah. Some of the things that I thought interesting, kind of going along with some of the things you shared, is I find it interesting because Tonga is very hierarchical, right?
Yeah.
There's
Mm,
layers, there's responsibilities, everyone has their place. But what happens when they come to the religious event? What happens when they come to the taula? They say
mm,
it's pleasing to the gods that you guys are all the same,
mm,
right?
mm,
They when the taula's there and you're sitting in this religious setting,
mm.
they're told that they're viewed all the same, which is kind of unusual because that to me tells me that, obviously there's the Christian influence of we're all children of God, we're all equal. We
Yeah.
have different stations in life. Everyone has different stations in life. But when you peel that back in the religious setting, we're all equals, we're all children of God, we're as important as the next person. Now, you take that to what Tupo the First did, and freeing the people. Really, I mean, there's two ways to look at it. I hear a lot of this online. There's a lot of people who say, oh, everyone were slaves to the Tuitonga. And I can understand why they would say that. And I would say in some instances that's kind of true. Um, but the reality is from listening to this experience by William Mariner and how in the religious setting everyone's equal, right?
Uh,
Everyone's equal. The gods prefer you to be equal. It's not us. That's not a far bridge to build for Tupo the First to understand. We probably need to expand the freedom and the capacity of the commoners, right? Like that would not necessarily be a totally foreign idea if in the religious settings everyone is intended to be somewhat equal, right?
mm,
And there's some interesting things from my mind is the freeing of the people, quote unquote. It wasn't necessarily, and I gotta be careful a little bit because it was freeing the people, and I guess you could view it as slaves, but that it was to me more a question of ownership of property. That
mm,
that is really the difference, right? Like, let's say this is one of the biggest criticisms people have of capitalism right now, with capitalism getting out of control.
yeah.
What's happening? All the big corporations and all the top 1%,
Control the money flow. Yeah.
they're controlling all the property. That's
Mm,
really because they have the money flow. So that's really the problem. But would you say that the average person living in the West is a slave? Well, you could technically, depending on your interpretation, right?
mm,
For example, here in America, can you really own your home? Well, not
no,
really if you spend all your money to buy it, but if you miss your taxes for a few years, the government comes and takes it from you. So
yeah.
one with the argument, you're a slave
Mm,
because the government owns everything. You are
yeah.
subject to the government.
Yeah.
And we all saw with COVID, depending on the scenario, the government can even force you to not even leave your home.
Mm,
You
mm,
can't even go to church. So you have to be as fair as you can be because we know for a fact, based off of George Vason's account, the Tongan commoners would freely leave and go to different chiefs,
yeah.
even to,
At
even
will. At will. Yeah.
at will. But what was the problem? They couldn't own property because all the land belonged to the Tuitonga, and then the Tuitonga would divvy it up
Divvy it up.
to the people. right? Um, and it would get to the point where you would have certain families on opposite sides of the war. And then, William Mariner says they're going to go and they're going to fight people. And what they would do, oh, we're going to have a meeting to talk to our family because they chose to go and live with this chief, right?
Mm,
And because they chose to go live with that chief, they have a duty and an obligation to that chief,
mm.
right? So I, I
Ooh.
guess this is important to have this conversation because too many people just, I guess, press the easy button. Oh, all Tongans were slaves,
Mm,
and then everybody just runs with that narrative. I was like, well, I can understand why you took that definition, but depending on how you look at it, that might not be an accurate definition of how the Tongans really behaved. And then just the same thing with Christianity. Oh, you were colonized. The only, you guys were just folding. Well, that's one way to explain it. Another way to explain it is what you said. Actually, there were a lot of similarities with I do want to add one more clarification, Masi, before I turn over
yeah,
the
go
time
for
to
it.
you. There is the old religion, the
Mm,
new religion, and then there was something in between. And William Mariner and George Mason are kind of in the somewhere in between.
between.
And the proof is how Taufa'ahau behaved towards all the outer islands who had these gods. They were kind of more worshiping their ancestors, right?
Uh,
And how he would really cleanse all those religious sites. But the old religion that was in Mu'a, he didn't.
didn't touch. Mm,
He didn't touch. And you have to ask the question, why?
mm,
Why didn't he do that? Well, you can look at the Tu'itonga. You could look at he was raised by the Taula of the old religion, one of the
mm.
most well recognized and most well respected Taulas or priests of the old religion, right?
Good one. Mm,
Um, and so, I mean, these are interesting things to think about. Just kind of glazing over, oh, they were slaves. Oh, you folded to Christianity. That's doing a disservice and doesn't really help anyone. But sounds like
mm.
you had some thoughts, Musty, or things there.
No, just with that word of obligation and fatongia, like I feel like that's a word that tongues like even come within family stuff. If families are on two different sides, if one certain family has made like let's just say an oath to a certain ho'eki, they're gonna defend their oath of their fatongia to that certain ho'eki if it comes even with family ties that they're even in the battles. It takes me back to the your conversation with Maui Tegelangi with the Tui Kanupolu with a famous warrior with the chestnut, Daifi. He
Yeah,
gave half, right? Because on the battles before they were on the same, but because he was from the outer islands and he was fighting against some of the Tui Kanupolu on Tongatapu, they were on the different sides, but they acknowledged each other. But he had a fatongia to the outer island Tongans that were kind of coming to Tongatapu, and the Tui Kanupolu having his obligation to the chiefs and areas within the Hifo side. So I think that's a very tonguing thing to with that fatongia, with our oath that whoever we make our oath with uh, is a big deal. Even comes to our own family clan if we're on different sides. But I just find that very interesting because I feel like that's such a very tonguing thing with your fatongia doing it. Even we may complain here and there certain things, but when we have an oath to do something, at the end of the day, most people will come around to to achieve it or do it. But I just find that very interesting when you were sharing that with a different family with George Mason and
yeah.
then being different sides of the battles and even costing the life. Like it's crazy, you know?
And this is where we're coming back to, Masi. If I had to choose language, tattoos, ancient cultural dances, some of these
Mm,
other things, or hold on to the fatongia, the obligations, right?
mm, mm.
The nature of distinguishing family ties and your duty.
Yeah,
You know what I would
yeah.
pick? I would pick those things over tattoos.
Yeah.
over traditional dance and everything. That's not to say that those things don't add value, they add value, but you really have to think to understand the root and what
Mm,
you can compromise on and where you cannot compromise on,
mm,
right? and
yeah.
and and you know that story, and I didn't know that that's our uncle Uluamu's name. I guess he was a twin, and
Uluave, the Uluave
yeah,
and Ulamu kind of names where they
yeah,
come from. Yeah.
yes, that's tied to that one chief that took those two heads, right?
Yeah.
That those are fascinating stories, because it's those stories that help us understand what it means to be Tongan, what it means to be Polynesian. I don't
Mm,
care how many tattoos you get, it doesn't give you the fortitude or the dedication to follow through with that, right?
mm,
To have that type of commitment and willingness to sacrifice. And it's very rare. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's very rare for that type of behavior to happen for the first time with the first person who's ever done that. The
mm,
reason why these chiefs behave that way is because their ancestors usually had behaved that way for thousands of years, which makes it much easier for them to behave that way,
mm,
right?
mm,
And this also comes back to what we were talking about earlier, why Christianity was so well accepted. When you understand the story of Taufa Ahau, how he was raised by the ancient religion, by one of those priests, and he obviously would have had access with Tautai, understanding the principles and the concepts of the ancient religion. That's why. That's probably why Taufa Ahau had very specific tests for Pitavi,
mm,
right? Because he not only understands physical power, physical world influence, and political power, but being raised by Kautai also told him this is how you measure and understand what a god is.
mm, mm.
Who knows? I mean, I'm just thinking out loud. Obviously, I wasn't there, but we have to look at these things and understand why. Because I'm one of those things don't happen by chance. Because I'm a person who believes in God, I believe things happen for a reason. There was a reason why Taufaha was sickly. There was a reason why the only person that could heal him was Kautai. Right?
Mm,
There's a reason why Taufaha and Laufini Tonga, when they were young chiefs, crossed paths before Laufini Tonga became Tuitonga. Right?
mm.
Like these things are all interconnected, and it's fascinating when you look at those things. But this is kind of an interesting way to look at it, and that's why we appreciate Lolo and Kava University for
Yeah.
creating this content, because as we listen through this content, it and use the approach and the psychology of the Kava sessions that our ancestors have done for thousands of years, we can learn things and at least explore new ideas, and who knows where it'll lead us. But
Correct.
anything else, Masi, before I head back
Nope. Nope. We can go back to our man Kava University.
in core?
Oh, I'm not hearing it, Tua. Are you hearing it?
Oh, I muted it because it had
The commercial.
the commercial. Sorry. God,
No, all good.
this
All
is
good.
technical difficulties. You should hear
Now
it now.
the place that
Yep.
that
All good.
they're facing is vacant, and typically either the highest chief, so either Finau or another higher chief would go and take that place, and then they would come and surround and continue mixing. They would continue drinking kava until the kava was done. So they basically created a circle after the ceremony itself. Mariner says that the priest's violent agitation and emotion that he shows when he's speaking um, could be confused or could be mistaken as him just trying to convinced. It's almost like it could have been fake, is basically what he was saying. But Mariner said that he didn't have a reason to believe that. He really believed that the priest was that emotional. It seemed genuine. It seemed real. And for those of us who go to funerals and know the feel of when people speak at a funeral, they really feel this stuff. They really feel this power. They really feel when they're talking, because of the souls that are in there. For some reason, it generates energy, and that energy is shared throughout the group. When you're sitting there talking, somebody's speaking, and they're speaking truth and they're speaking power. That it isn't fake. We feel that. We know that. And especially since they just came back from Tonga, killing some of their brothers and sisters in Nukalofa, we know that whatever was being spoken, and it was a lot of counsel as far as someone speaking in the place of God, what is more pleasing, how to behave now, how to act, the characteristics, the attributes of who we are and how we are, was genuine for, at least for Mariner to say, yeah, he's heard priests and pastors preach and get emotional and agitated and so forth to give it the look of power and the look of the Holy Ghost or the Spirit or energy. But he said as he sat there, he didn't think that any of that was scripted, or perhaps it was practiced and performed before, but the energy and the power was always the same. Mariner himself said that he believed it was the actual Spirit of God, or that spirit that the priest was speaking with was of genuine power. Mariner said this happens a lot. There's a lot of visitations of spirits, primarily to women, especially in dreams. And when they do get in this position, they speak as if being inspired by either a spirit from the past, or the God himself, or kings and chiefs from before. They believe that they have the capability of being possessed of these spirits and these souls, and they speak for them, or that those people and God speak through them when they have these type of ceremonies. And for the most part, you can kind of tell and see that because the language is different. The language is as proper as possible. The language is as eloquent, the best words that you cannot mistake for anything other than the genuine feel or the soul of someone who's speaking for God himself. And when priests or people start receiving revelation or inspiration from God, they take kava to that person and give them kava to drink, because they feel that the kava opens up the soul and the mind, so that you're in more the frequency as far as being able to speak freely or more openly, or have more inspiration or revelation. They take kava to this person, whoever is speaking, because they believe that kava actually allows the body or the mind to be in tune with the spirits or with the gods. I kind of know what that's like. Sometimes when I drink kava, either a lot or too much, I feel like I'm being inspired. Oh, Lord. But it does.
Marie. Masi, you need some inspiration?
Need inspiration or just some relaxation?
Is that what I
uh,
feel every time with Takava is the spirit? But
yeah.
yeah. One of the things that stuck out to me
Mm,
is, you notice it sounds like Ulukalala is there somewhere. I don't know if he's sitting with the men or not.
mm,
He could have been. But I find it interesting, like we discussed earlier, in the spiritual setting, everyone's the same. But what happens when we transfer from the spiritual setting to the temporal setting? Then the hierarchy comes in,
mm,
right? Which is very interesting, because when you look at Genesis and you look at Adam and Eve, it doesn't seem like there's a hierarchy when they're in the garden before the fall, right?
Mm,
There doesn't seem to, or at least it's not explicitly shared that there's a hierarchy. But once the fall comes into play, then God says, okay, there has to be some hierarchy. You have to do X to get Y. This is what you got to do,
mm,
right? But I find it interesting that in the spiritual setting, everyone's the same. But then when you come back to the temporal setting, then there's hierarchy, and that's what we were discussing on the one on the other on the one of our other live digital kava sessions. Is when you look at the behavior of the Tongans as shared by William Mariner, and let's use the example of the families meeting before the war,
mm,
right? Mariner says it's like super friendly, everyone's talking nicely to each other, and that's one of the things that I notice is, and we notice this, it's almost like everyone understands that there's more to life than just this life. Death is not the worst thing that can happen to you,
mm,
right? Now, and you see what William Mariner is explaining is he's explaining it's like, man, this is kind of a unusual situation. He feels that the spiritual setting, though you could question it, we can question everything, but it seems genuine. And in the spiritual setting, there is a big difference between the spiritual setting and the temporal setting. And I feel like that is why they're able to behave the way they're behaving. It's that knowledge of an afterlife that they're like, hey, cousin, uncle, I know we're on opposite sides of the battle. We may end up killing each other, but you know what? In Pulotu, everything's going to be fine. You know what I mean?
mm,
Like,
mm,
you only behave that way because you have what we would typically say in the church, an eternal perspective,
mm,
right? When all you have in your mind is here and now, you behave very differently. And these are some of the interesting things. Just because you disagree with someone, just because you're on opposite sides of a quote unquote battle with someone, doesn't mean you have to hate them, and it doesn't mean they hate you. That's
mm,
something that I think our culture today could learn a lot, right?
mm.
Is just because someone says no to you or doesn't give you what you think you deserve, doesn't mean you have to hate them, right? And it doesn't mean that that's the end of the world. Like, I don't know. That was some of the interesting that's popping up to me, because really what I'm really interested is William Mariner is giving us a description on how they behave, but I'm trying to use that to try and understand why our ancestors behave the way they behave. And that's what kind of my mind goes through when I'm listening through what William Mariner is describing. But any thoughts on that, Masi?
Yeah, no, and I'll just tag along with your thought with the eternal perspective, knowing that this is not the end of our journey of life. This is only part of it, and I feel like many many people of the during that time understood that principle of understanding that this is only like a step into the next journey. We may be on different sides of the battle and maybe that's why each families were, even though they had their fatomia um um or oath, they had to obliged with, because they made maybe a covenant or something, or it's just in our characteristics as Tongans in fulfilling our duty, that this was only a temporary time. And that's the same kind of principle with, even with the Christianity faith now, that there is another realm after this life. When this is done, there is another part of the journey that we're going to go through in the spirit world, kind of thing, which is, you can say, is Pulotu, what they're trying to say. So
Mhm.
this light, I think it's even in the definition of what Tongans refer in the language is this light, my money, meaning just this light. So this is just this light. There's another light coming within the spiritual realm with Pulotu. So I think that's a,
Oh,
that's what I'm thinking, right?
I did not realize that until you said it, Masi.
Yeah.
That
Well, that's
ma money is mama ni.
yes.
This light,
Mm. Well,
which,
that's what I'm
yeah,
thinking. Because if you think about it, what does Christ and angels kind of refer to? People when they describe like an angel or something, glory or righteousness, it's they said it's a different light that even the world can't see. And that's what I'm saying with the definition, even with the Tongan, every other Polynesian language to they use beneath lalolangi, which is like beneath the sky, to 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 identify that this world. Tongan is one of the few or the only, and regarding your last episode, we're probably the more closest to what the Polynesian language was back in those days as a Polynesian nation. We're the only one that still kept that this light, ma mani, right? So I just find that very interesting in the spiritual sense to why many of the people were like, we'll go, maybe somebody's head will get clubbed or whatever, but this is only this light. We're only gonna be here this light for temporary before we transition to Pulotu. That's what I'm just trying to
mm,
explain to it, because even the language with my money, we're just in this light. There's another light that's waiting for us in Pulotu. But I just find that very
very
interesting.
interesting. No, that's a very, I never thought of it. Makes total sense of ma money, because you're
Mm,
saying mama and then ni, meaning this light, right? And
mm,
here's the other interesting thing. Because of that, Masi, in the gospel, there are two types of seasons or times:
mm,
the day where work can be done, and night when there's no work to be done, right? And so even the concept of the creation and mama, interesting.
mm,
I
mm,
never thought of that before.
mm, mm. Yeah. So I just find that very interesting to, with especially like what we talked about what we've kept and the reason why we were not being able to be colonized. Like certain, who knows if we were colonized, that maybe that phrase we would have called like everything else, lalo langi.
Lost.
Yes, we
Yeah.
wouldn't say my money. Like, is to me, that's a like what you said. It's like, man, why? And then when you say why, if you think about it, like why my money? Break it down, this light, and then when you understand further, scripture studies with the different kind of lights and the special light, and this is like a phase kind of thing. Because I just find it funny that we use that term to describe this earth life, which is interesting.
Very interesting.
Mm,
Maria, that was a good one. That I like that. And thanks for sharing that, because I never put two and two together. So that's interesting.
mm.
All right.
Open up, or it does take the mind to places to, where people just speak, and you see how people play around, and you see how people speak. It's so free and it's so open, and uh, there can be no taking anything in offensive. You know, everything is for some reason either spiritual, entertaining, or comical, or clever, but we all feel, right? There's a vibe, there's a feel to um, when you partake kava like that. In this case, and in a lot of religions, they still take kava for religious purposes, and perhaps it started from those days where you take kava to people who are receiving inspiration and revelation, and because it puts them in tune with the spirit or with the gods. Mariner said that there was one instance where one of these priests started speaking and receiving inspiration and revelation. They took kava to him, and then after the kava was done, he had no inspiration or revelation, and the people were surprised. They're like, "What? He's not receiving any inspiration." So they took the kava away from him, and they were disappointed that he wasn't receiving revelation. And perhaps that was because he was just kona. You know what I'm saying? Sometimes he's just kona. Maybe he was totaloing. Maybe he was just talking, clowning on everybody. So sometimes it doesn't work that way. Sometimes it's just, come on, man. Yeah, inspiration. Yeah. Oh my God, what? They're like, what? Nah. We came to get inspiration. Take that kava back. Let's go. It's customary for when you get sick or ill to take that ill person to the priest to diagnose them, this ill or sick person. Then they diagnose them, and then they start getting things and start experimenting on plants and so forth, and try to heal this person. And after 3 or 4 days, if the person isn't healed, they take them to a different priest, give them kava. What do you feel? What is your revelation, your inspiration? What plants do we need? That person comes up with plants. And this is a lot of the ways how they came up with the plants and the medicines. And we all know that Tonga has a lot of medicines, a lot of medicine people. And it comes from trees and plants and everything else. This is kind of how it all started, right? They take kava to a priest, make them drink. What plants do we need to use to heal this person? They try their ingredients or their potion or formula through some plants. 3 or 4 days later, he's not healed. The family says, "All right, it's not working with this guy. Let's take him to another priest. Give him another priest.
Mm.
Give him kava. Kava was that. You got to give the guy. You got to give the priest kava. Let him receive
Oh,
revelation
wow.
and inspiration of how to heal this
Mm.
person, and then he'll figure out which plants to use." And they did that.
You had something you want to mention, Masi?
Yeah, well, it just took me with the whole oh,
Oh, are you there, Masi? Did we lose you? Looks like we may have lost Mr. Aotearoa. With that, we'll jump into some of the comments here. Devita Tonga Shumako says, Malo ngawe motama. Devita, thank you, thank you. Appreciate it. Nelly Fale, thank you very much. We also have Hakau Pikula says, Malo fellas, welcome, welcome. Tees says, Malo, Malo, appreciate it, Tees. Welcome, welcome to the live digital Kava session. Sam Taunga Kava asks, how much stronger is Kava when consuming it raw versus dry? The raw Kava is much, much stronger, from my understanding, Sam. And so it is way more powerful. The drying of the Kava is done so that it can just last longer. But in all honesty, the straight from the plant, while it's still raw, is a much more potent one. Um, and so yeah, so that's really what my understanding is between those two differences, right? That the dry is almost as strong, but the raw is much stronger, but the dry just lasts longer. Hey, Polly Prince, yes, we're looks like Mr. Aotearoa is trying to make it back. Looks like he had Malohe Kava. Maybe the Kava in Aotearoa is getting the inspiration is getting in the way of Elon Musk's satellites for us today.
hey, skataki tautama na si ngalo ge tau e laptop pe mate ai pe. So I was able to charge it.
Oh, can you see me, Masi?
Yep, I can see you. I can
Oh,
see you.
you're back. You're back.
Yep. No, I was gonna say I forgot to charge my laptop, so sorry for that little slight interruption, everyone.
See, I
Forgive
was
me
I
on
was
that.
thinking the Kava from Aotearoa was too strong. It got
Too
in the
strong,
way.
too
The
strong.
inspiration got in the way of Elon Musk's satellite connection.
No, no, do it now. I was just gonna say when Lolo when Lolo was explaining like taking the kava to certain people, that remind me of Taufa How going to multiple priests, and I'm sure when he went to these multiple priests, it's almost like because kava was it's even now it's still valued. Back in those days, it's a high value. That was like your form of payment, and I feel like the kava is so important that even I feel like when you were like a tama ohutada tao, like a tattoo artist, that was something that you gave if you wanted like a tattoo. Like to me, it was kind of a form of transaction with
It's like the
kava that they
currency. It's like the
It was like the
currency.
currency, along with the livestock and maybe the the yam and stuff that you had. But I think in value, kava was probably the most important thing to take. But I'm just saying, like, you know that's kind of was our way of our people of getting, maybe asking for help. And it was like a payment kind of thing, was taking a piece of kava plant and presenting it to that family that maybe you're requesting some assistance. So that's what I was just trying to explain when Lolo was kind of going with, if a certain priest, and that's what happened with Taufa How when he was sickly. No other priest was able to help heal him until he went to Mua with the kautai. So yeah, and in the form of going all over, you got to have lots of kava. If you're going to multiple people, asking, you're most likely having lots of kava to kind of give away to use for that
Payment.
particular person. Yeah, for payment. So that's all
Mm,
I wanted to say.
okay, Maro.
Eventually, they healed, right? But they didn't always heal on the first try. But they did come up with a whole bunch of medicines that way as well. Pulotu is a spirit world. It's a spirit world for the gods. It's a spirit world for lower ranking gods. That's what they believe Pulotu is. We believe Pulotu right now, these days, in context, as the next life or the spirit world or the place where the spirits go when people die. That's what Pulotu is. That's what they've always believed. Mariner mentions a young chief that saw a woman over a few nights of dreams. Didn't know who she was exactly, but when he'd wake up, he kept seeing this, or kept telling Mariner. Mariner would go and visit him often, and he would tell him, "Yeah, I saw this woman again. Didn't know who it was, but they, because of those type of dreams, those type of things, they absolutely believed there was a spirit world somewhere. That woman would tell him things, give him instructions. So for them, that was enough for them to already know instinctively that our minds here on earth are what we see and what we think and what we learn is what it is. But there is a greater power, there is a government in the next life that run whatever it runs, and it allows them to communicate to us through whatever this technology is called dreaming. This is how they communicate to us. After a few days, the guy died, and they all assumed, oh, that woman probably called them back, told them to go back, or whatever that was. So the belief in the next life has always been inside of our culture. This young chief was one of the ones laying at one of the priest's house, right? The one that diagnoses, laying there, and that's how Mariner was able to go visit him a few times. And he even predicted his own death, that he was going to die through the communication of the next realm, that he was going to be taken. And a lot of our people today believe that too. My dad, he's almost died, had a stroke and whatnot, and he saw things. He saw people. He saw his mom and his aunties, and they sent them back, according to him. So right now, everybody believes that. As far as those
Mm,
religious, we all know information is documented now through the scriptures and so forth. But before any of that, before any of the scriptures, documentations, or any readings of anything, these people believe that. We've always believed stuff like that. Mariner spoke with Finau's son, right?
Hmm.
quick question, Masi.
What's up?
Do you know how rare it is for indigenous people to believe in an afterlife? Let's see if we can ask Rock this, because I'm
That's
interested.
interesting.
Yeah.
I would see. I don't know about. I don't. I'm not too sure, Thor. I'm not too sure. Indigenous people believing in the afterlife. Um, yeah, that's something interesting to kind of know more about.
Let's
Yeah.
pull this up and let's see what Grok says.
Mm. But
Um,
no, I was just gonna mention Tua with you know what Lolo's mentioning. We've always believed that, and there's a good portion, I would say, even today, with Polynesians overseas and back in the islands, that we still have that strong belief. But like is it gonna be tested in the next? Because now we're gonna talk about for the future generations, right? If they're gonna still have that belief, because we can honestly say a lot of the let's just say Palangis or people who are non-Polynesians, most of them, a lot of people have that same belief, but over time, it's changed, right? It's kind of moved over time, and that's why it's so important. Like what we said to with the language, if you had to choose your language or your family genealogy and history and your heritage, understanding that, because if your prosperity does not understand your family legacy, it can get lost and you can lose it. So it's going to be very difficult, because we're not going to be exempt if we don't continue what our ancestors have kind of taught us, with the understanding and thought of there is an afterlife, and what you do here is going to mean it's going to mean something in the afterlife where you end up. So that's just me when we were talking about that,
mm,
with Lolo talking about us and always kind of understanding that with the afterlife, and using the example of his father when he was sent back after kind of visiting the ancestors visiting him, and he was not ready to go yet. But yeah.
mm. All right, let's do this. Let's see what Grok says here. Oh,
Super
says
Grok.
belief. Yes, belief in the afterlife among indigenous peoples globally was nearly universal, though the specifics varied widely by culture and region. Most indigenous societies held spiritual worldviews that assumed some form of existence after death, often tied to nature, ancestors, or cosmological cycles. Due to the diversity of indigenous cultures spanning Africa, the Americas, Australia, Asia, and the Pacific, no single belief system applies, but patterns emerge from anthropological and historical records. In the Americas, many Native American tribes believed in a spiritual afterlife. For example, the Lakota envisioned a spirit world where souls joined ancestors,
Mm,
while the Navajos saw death as a transition to another existence, with rituals to guide the deceased. The Inca and the Maya had complex afterlife cosmologies, with realms like the Mayan Xibalba or Inca's upper world for the virtuous. In Mesoamerica, over 80% of documented cultures had afterlife beliefs involving judgment or soul journeys per archaeological evidence like burial goods and codices. African indigenous groups also, as the Yoruba and Akan, often believed in dynamic afterlife where ancestors remained active in the living world. Ethnographic studies suggest over 90% of pre colonial African societies had afterlife concepts, often involving reincarnation or ancestral realms. In Australia, Aboriginals peoples' dream time included beliefs in spirits returning to the land or ancestral planes with no clear end to existence. Similarly, Polynesian and Pacific Islander cultures like the Maori believed death as a passage to a afterlife is pretty common.
yeah. Mm, mm,
So this is this is how it makes it interesting, right?
hmm
If that's the case, and if we believe that God is the God of all people, and God says he loves all his people, his children, why is it that some people freak out when we say Hikuleo is God? They, and I understand. To be fair, I'm fine with, hey, Tua, it's unlikely, right? but
Mm.
but it's possible because because look, all of these people had beliefs in the afterlife, and how did they come up with those beliefs? How is it that everyone, 90% of the world, came up with these ideas if it wasn't God telling them? I don't know. What do you
Mm. Well, see, no, I'm along the lines with you. Tua Hikureo is God, right? The God of Israel is that same God that we all worship. Now, I think it's just like what you said. There's a little bit loose, right? There's been a loose, let's just say, maybe a pulling away from that concept because it even happened with during the time of the civil wars and was part of the cleansing of Taufahau. And because that was more recent, right? It's just been a popular belief with many people thinking that that was the so-called traditional gods because and it's just the same thing with the world today with people if you're not teaching that there is a god like the god of Hikudeo or the our heavenly father kind of god that you can lose the definition of that and you can even see even the definition of god can be used in different kind of ways. So I mean it's one of those things that we can lose it if it's not being taught. That's just me. I don't know if there's anything else that you think, Thor,
Yeah.
but
Well, I just find it interesting because we've released a couple videos on Hikuleo, right?
mm,
And we dug into this a little bit, right? Masi, we searched online on where this idea of Hikuleo being a female, and
correct.
there is no like documented oral history, which still
Correct.
could be questionable, but there, and we spoke with certain historians like Xiaoxi Ilayu, and he's like, he doesn't
Yeah.
know where that comes from, but somehow that's what a lot of people believe,
mm, mm, mm.
so it's kind of interesting that people will jump out and mock that idea. And I understand it's a stretch for some people and it's kind of from left field, but they don't even realize that what they actually say they believe in, what's reality, has little to no backing to it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
No,
don't
and,
know.
and it's stuff like that too. Like you and I, like you said, we try to find who's the one that said that these female looking figurines. It's more like an ancestor of like maybe a powerful, what Lola was talking about. Maybe there were some women that
Yeah,
really had some spiritual gifts and some parts of the village maybe had a certain female looking person and they kind of worship like an ancestor of that particular woman and became a thing and then we just don't know who gave the name that this was Hikudeo. And look,
exactly.
we have many of our own people thinking that that's Hikudeo. That's the figurines of Hikudeo. It's a woman.
Exactly.
So it's
It
it's
could be
hilarious.
like, it could be just like you're saying. Maybe there was a taula or someone in the village that was recognized. It could have been they just had dreams of a woman that would come and tell them stuff, just like
Mm,
this young gentleman did, right?
mm,
And maybe that dream told them information that actually came true. Then everybody's, oh, I guess this is a god we should consider.
correct.
Make some figurines, and then all of a sudden that became fact. When you're just like, what? That came out
Yeah.
of absolutely nowhere. Here's
Mm,
some questions here, some comments. Sam Taungakava says there are some accounts of shamans witnessed by missionaries using raw kava to enter a higher state of trance to communicate with the deities. Any chance there's some truth to this?
I
Any
have
thoughts
no
on
idea.
that, Masi?
I'm not too familiar with this with Sam Tangakawa's question here, Tua. I don't know if you have anything to add to this.
He, he kind of asked earlier what's the difference between the consuming of the raw kava and the dried kava. I've never drank raw kava before, besides when I had a toothache growing up in Tonga,
Mm, mm,
right? And then you chew on the kava because it just numbs
Nice.
so it's much stronger. That's my understanding, is the raw kava is much stronger. So if it does put you into some kind of wavelength or whatever, the raw kava would make that much stronger. So I can see that. Is there truth to it? That seems like that's probably true, that they probably did use the raw kava more often. Now, if you're saying, is it true that they spoke to the deities? Honestly, there
Who
are
knows?
familiar spirits that are going around. Just because you're getting influenced by something doesn't always mean it's God. It could
Mm,
be the Aotearoa just walking around having nothing better to do.
correct. Well, that's the thing, right? Not every spiritual if you get possessed spiritually, it's not always the good spiritually
Positive.
possessed. Yes.
Yeah.
So and that's the thing, and that's why it's important. Well, and that's probably the reason why How did some cleansing with some of the oral history with Maui Tekelangi sharing. Some people think they were praying to the traditional the Lotu Mua, but it was not, and that's
Yeah.
why he went and cleansed some of these fortifications. So yeah, so that's you got to decide if it's a good spirit or not. It's really up to the family. It's really up to the family. They say,
You
they take their kava and then they take it to a taula and like gi yongo kovi gi taula go ni de aluge taula ke.
the other
It's
one.
really all, yeah, it's all depend on the people, and that's to me, and that's why it's important for you to sense that righteousness, or is this just a little something else?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sam's cracking up on the not that Tatevolo Hawa. It's funny though, Sam, because that's the danger of just reaching out to the spiritual realm for the sake of reaching out. Oh, it's no different than us here in this physical world. Or Wakakaiata. The people who are usually doing good things, they're too busy doing good things. If you're a good spirit, you're probably busy doing good things. If you're a bad spirit, you're the one that has the time to go around and mess around with people for the sake of messing with people, which is why it's dangerous.
Yeah.
Um, Here's a comment here also by Sam. It says, it's unfortunate that our Ho'eki class didn't believe that commoners deserve a place in Pulotu like them. Well, see, that's the thing that's interesting, Sam,
Mm,
with what William Mariner is explaining. In the spiritual setting, everyone was the same, right? And that's where we're, and then also mentioning that there was the we'll call it the root original religion, and then there's the Christianity, and then there was something that was in the middle. That's
mm,
when William Mariner are coming. That we may not know whether that is really what the original religion thought, but as it decayed and as the empire lost its stability, and there's more little chiefdoms and more little priests developing their own versions of what the truth was, then kind of weird doctrines like, oh yeah, only the Ho'eki are going to go to Pulotu. Some of those develop. It's no different than, from my perspective, what happened with Christianity when the 12 apostle passed away and all this other stuff. All of a sudden, everyone and their dog had a church and a gospel and a version to
mm,
to explain. Any
mm.
thoughts on that, Masi?
No, like when did this idea kind of come about that only the Ho'ekis have a place in Pulotu?
There, there
Yeah.
are some oral histories that said that Kakau Ho'ekipe o Wagi Pulot, and
Oh,
that
okay.
if you were a tu'a, you were like the lower class, or what did Dad said that they're called, the avare, I think is what they
Mm,
call it as
mm,
well.
mm.
That they were, some of the oral histories or old ideas were they didn't go to Pulotu, but then
Okay.
you go to George Mason,
I know.
and there
Yeah, yeah.
and there are people who weren't Aiki and stuff that were, they
Had the
said, are
knowledge.
going to Pulotu,
Yeah.
right?
Well, and
So it just depends.
I've always just also heard some oral. See, and this is the thing with oral history. Everyone has your own pickings on which one you come across with. But I've heard some oral histories of saying that right in this light, everyone, like you said, we're a hierarchical society, but in the next life, and that's why if you were gonna be if death was gonna come to you in this life, everyone is gonna have another start in the Pulotu world realm. kind of thing. So
Yeah.
that's why I was like, just depending with Sam with what your thing. I've heard some, if that's the case, I haven't heard any of those, but obviously Tua and Fade have heard some of those oral histories. But like I said, it even George Mason with his encounter with some of the kids, and these were kid levels of just people in the village, just having that knowledge of saying that Pulotu exists, and that's where this person was gonna go and dwell at. So he's not really dead. He's just going at a different realm. But that's just my thoughts there.
100%. We'll come back to Lolo here.
He was a tributary chief in Hamoa at this point in time. So he was a tributary chief in Hamoa. Remember Finau Fisi, which is Finau Ulukalala's uncle, Finau Mafanga's brother, he was tributary chief in Fiji. So Finau Ulukalala's son, tributary chief in Hamoa, told Mariner that he was visited. They say visited, and it's interchangeable with possessed by Tukuaho. Visited in the dreams or even possessed and seen him in visions or whatever. And Mariner asked him how he knew it was Tukuaho. And Mogangoa told him that it's a feeling, right? He said he felt a burning, he felt heat. And that heat and that energy was a signal or that part of information that confirmed that that was Tukuaho. Remember, Tukuaho was the one that was in Tonga, the one that cut off 12 of his cook's arms to mark them as his. Tukoniwa and Finau went and killed, right? But just that piece of information, he felt heat, he felt warmth, and then information came to him in his mind that told him this is Tukuaho. A lot of the similarities as far as the spiritual context of information, how we learn, how we know, how we sense things through influence. These guys already had that concept. They already knew and believed that type of stuff. Fast forward to today, and it's the exact same thing or the same processes in the same ways when we read the scriptures and feel those things, and then
Very
information
interesting.
is confirmed.
Mm.
Finau Ulukalala himself would often tell Mariner that he has been inspired by, visited, or even possessed by Mui Mui. Mui Mui was the king before Tukuaho. Remember, Tukuaho is Tupoto'a's father. Tupoto'a is Taufa.
And this is the Tutanukupolu guys they're
first father.
talking about there.
So
Yeah.
Tukuaho and Mui Mui.
Finau knew generationally these men that were in government even before the recorded stuff that we know, right? Mui Mui was before Tukuaho, which means it was in the mid to early 1700s. Finau told Mariner that he used to be visited by Mui Mui. So these are some of the things that, and I don't know why Mariner chose to put this part of the book in here, but this is kind of some of more of the personality and the behavior and the characteristics of Tonga from a spiritual point of view. I know we went from war to this, and this is part two. It's basically part two, which shows our relationship with the gods, our relationship with the ancestors through dreams, through Kava, through inspiration, through revelation, and how we kept that communication the same way even before Christianity showed up. We communicated through influence and through the mind and through the spirit and through the dreams and so forth. So anyway, that's part two. I know it's been a while. That's part two. I talked to one of my boys out in the Bay. He said that he's waiting for the next, and some of them are waiting. I know some of you guys are waiting for the next. And he said he wanted to read it, and I was like, "Don't trip. I have time out here. I'll get back to it." As you know, I'm over here working at this restaurant, and I'm gonna start buckling down this year. We got to finish this book this year, right? So we can talk more about and open up more of the history of this point in time before writing, before reading, before Christianity, before anybody could start making up their own history. We're going to get through this book so that we can have a reference point of the behaviors and characteristics of how Tongans were during this point in time. So stick with me. I'll be back. Try to be back tomorrow morning and do this before I open up. and we'll get through this. Okay? Daudoksio.
Malo,
Nice.
malo. Any thoughts, Mas?
No, that's a true thing. I go back to what we kind of shared on the live digital Kava session in the past with when Fade forgot some people's names in the Tuitonga list, right? They tried to appear to Fade, they weren't able, so they went to his spouse and appeared to her to say that they need to be included into the Tuitonga when when Dad was compiling the list of the Tuitonga list, according to the langis that he was able to identify. So that is a very real thing, and that's a very important concept of how Polynesians stay in touch with their ancestors. Not all ancestors are always good. I might have to put that in there. People always say ancestors with a good thing. There's some bad. We all. It's like any family members we have. If you have an extended family, there's the funny ones, but not I just want to put that in there. There's always some ancestors that you say, you know what, just wait for me in Pulotu. I don't need you right now. Just wait
Yeah.
for me in Pulotu. But those kind of things. So I just thought I'll just share that. But that's a very real thing with this part of the Mariners account with him explaining, and Lolo also doing a good job explaining with our experiences in the with Pulotu and with our ancestors. So that's me, Dua. If there's anything else you wanna kind
Yeah,
of conclude.
the couple of things I want to kind of re-emphasize, we've touched it a bit throughout this. It is quite clear that our ancestors were very spiritual in nature.
Mm,
Spiritual knowledge, spiritual truth was like common for our ancestors, right? And it
mm,
wasn't unusual for them to say a thought or an idea came to my mind and it was from a spiritual source. Okay.
mm,
This is why Christianity and being religious is such a big part of our culture today. Because how do our God is a God who is spiritual in nature,
mm,
right? And I'm not talking about his physical nature, just how he behaves, how he communicates. He talks to our spirit and he gives us information through the Holy Ghost to our spirit to find out whether the Bible, the Book of Mormon, or whatever you believe in is true. You know it through spiritual means. So to really just kind of reemphasize, this is why Polynesians are so religious on average,
yes.
right? Because it's a continuation of what our ancestors have done for thousands of years. This is why I'm very hesitant to accept the idea Christianity is a form of colonization. Is it really? If you already had that type of spiritual tendency, if
Mm,
you already believed in the afterlife, if you already believed
great point.
in a God, right? Is it really? And this is the danger of, this is what we discussed on one of our live podcasts in the past. The whole concept of decolonization is an idea from the people who did all the colonizing. So if you went from colonization and you're now adopting decolonization, you're just moving from the idea of the colonizer to another idea of the colonizer. If you really want to say I want to disengage from quote unquote colonization, you have to really just say, hey, you know what were the behavior of my ancestors and what they really believed, and then all of a sudden you'll be shocked to find out a lot of things in Christianity is the same thing your ancestors believed
Mm,
in gods, in the spiritual realm, in afterlife,
mm,
right? In that families will cross paths again in the spirit world. Like these are things that are really important for us to have conversations on and really revisit. I think having these conversations are critical because not just because the content itself will cover what we're talking, but what we need to talk about, but it will give us ideas to talk about things that are important. Like earlier, Mashi, when we're talking about language. Is language the most important thing? Is tattoos the most important thing? Is it really? What does it mean to be Polynesian? Right? Especially with all these stuff going on about plastic Polynesian and you're
Mm,
not a Tongan if you're doing this or doing that. To me, those are all little branches, right? We
yeah.
I'm interested in getting to the root. I want to understand what the most fundamental things. And then once I understand that, then I will go out to the branches. But I also understand as I go out to the branches, if I have to concede something, I'm going to concede the branches, but I will not concede the root. And I think that's a really important thing. I really
Mm.
appreciate Lolo making the content. It does take a lot of time, it takes commitment. That's why we're always grateful for all of our listeners and our followers for the support. You know, Masi's the only one who makes millions of dollars on our podcast. So
Kuhay firma paanga bilin. Oh,
right now, I want you
Line na
guys
to
to line
yeah.
up in Aotearoa. You want to close us
Well,
out?
yeah. Well, to closing thoughts. Enjoyed our discussion regarding the Mariner account being shared by Lolo on his findings and his interpretations of the Mariners account. Enjoyed us talking about the spiritual connection and just remind us that we are spiritual people, as verified in the Mariners account. That's just my spill. Thank you everyone for joining us, viewing us, and sticking with us in this live digital Kava session on the Polynesianized podcast. We appreciate you, and keep shooting some questions and comments. We always look at them and try our best to respond to all of them. Wish you guys all the best. And just the two questions. The Polynesian Eyes podcast always leave with everyone is stay curious and ask the hard questions. Ovatu, take care.
Peace.
Peace.